This is Brixton, 1981. Tensions erupt between the black community and police.
The inevitable explosion of steam by a community which feels the police have been picking on them recently.
Many here felt over-policed and underprotected. A lot of young black people believe that officers treated them unfairly because of their race. Fires burned for 3 days. This was one of many significant flashpoints. Just a few years later, this estate in North London would become the scene of another clash. In 1985, the death of Cynthia Jarrett, a black woman who died of a heart attack after police searched her home, sparked more protests. Violence broke out as police tried to clear the streets. More than 50 officers were injured, and PC Keith Blakelock was murdered.
When police lost control of a half-mile stretch of road in Handsworth, the neighbourhood was reduced to a blazing inferno.
This wasn't just a London issue. In Birmingham, similar tensions arose. They saw 2 rounds of serious riots in Handsworth in 1981 and 1985. In the 90s, the murder of Stephen Lawrence in South London brought racial conflict to the surface again. The investigation into his death was flawed. In 1999, the Macpherson report looked into how police handled the case. They found the Metropolitan Police guilty of what it called institutional racism and recommended big changes. In 2011, anger erupted on the streets of the capital after Mark Duggan was shot and killed while police tried to arrest him. The disturbances left several cities in flames.
I do the job.
Police forces say they're trying to change by engaging with ethnic minority communities and recruiting more people from diverse backgrounds. But inequality still persists. The government's own figures show black people are 10 times more likely to be stopped and searched, but campaigners believe the number could be higher. And black people are also more than twice as likely to die in police custody in England and Wales. Protesters say they'll continue to fight until disparities like these in the UK are gone.
Well, when Neil Basu joined the Metropolitan Police in 1992, he admits that his friends and family thought he was insane. Today, Assistant Commissioner Basu has risen to be the UK's highest-ranking officer from an ethnic minority. Cathy Newman went to meet him and began by asking if he defends the decision of police in Bristol and London to hang back when public monuments were defaced.
I don't know enough about the public order decisions that were made at the time, but I'm saying with my knowledge of how public order policing is done in this country and the potential for it to go wrong, I'm not going to second guess a public order commander from sitting in the comfort of New Scotland Yard. I think they made the best decisions they could make in the dynamic situation that was unfolding in front of them, and probably to the good of everybody involved.
So the Police Federation chief who said that the Met tactics were very wrong and that you should be dealing with disorder far more robustly, have they got it wrong?
I don't agree with that comment, and I don't agree that that is the face of public order policing in the UK today.
If you hadn't been a police officer, would you have been there with the protesters?
Really? Probably.
You talked in your blog about how hard it was to be a BAME officer decades ago when you joined, and that actually friends and family thought you were insane to join the police. Have you yourself ever experienced racism within the force?
Yes. So, but interestingly, the most racism I've faced in the force has been from the public. So I'm not sitting here complaining about my career. I'm an assistant commissioner. I have nothing but praise for the profession I'm in, the service I'm in, and the support I've had as I've gone through the ranks. But I'm not naive. That isn't the experience of everybody. I mean, I'm one of the top 6 officers in the Met and one of the top 50 in the country, but it cannot possibly be right that I'm the only one who looks like this.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I don't think we've done enough to encourage, promote and help officers as they've gone through the ranks. And my inbox was full of comments from BAME officers who don't want to be seen to, how can I put this? It's easier for me. I'm an assistant commissioner. I'm expected to speak publicly. I'm expected to be a leader. When I joined in 1992, I just wanted to be a good cop. I did not want anyone to think that my skin colour was remotely relevant to how good a police officer I could be. And there's a lot of people who still feel like that. And I wonder, I don't know, because I'm speaking for me, I don't represent people of mixed race, black, white, I'm speaking as me. I wonder if some people still feel that I don't feel safe talking out about the problems I'm experiencing or the way I feel.
They don't feel safe within the Met or in a public setting?
Well, both. So I think the most important thing to remember about this is policing is just part of society. So if your lived experience, and I'm thinking about the people who really, really, have problems with us as a profession in policing, but if your lived experience is it was hard at school, it's hard in the health sector, I can't get a job, and by the way, the criminal justice system isn't going to be fair to me either, and then the next person you meet is a police officer, it's hardly surprising that inequality isn't reflected in the way they react to us. And we, as professionals, ought to understand that might be the case, and therefore whenever we speak to people we should do it with dignity, respect and an understanding and empathy about where they're coming from. We haven't always got that right, and if officers themselves don't feel they can speak up about things like that, that would be wrong. But this isn't 1992. I'm in an organisation, I wouldn't still be here, Kathy, 28 years later, if I didn't think the organisation had changed dramatically.
Did you question your place in the organisation because of the racism you'd experienced?
In the early days, because of the racism I experienced from the public, and I wondered, but not inside the profession.
What kind of incident
I could give you a list
sort of shook your confidence?
Well, I think that thing about, being called a coconut or a race traitor on the streets is quite difficult when you know you're going to be in emotional, inflammatory situations and you feel, I'm quite a big guy, so I don't feel physically at risk. But I did feel that this is all going to go wrong very quickly for me. So that shakes your confidence when you're young in service.
You've talked about the disproportionality in the criminal justice system, whether that's tasering or stopping and searching. Is it time to sort of look across the piece, including at the use of stop and search, and see whether that is now exacerbating tensions at this particular moment in history?
Well, it's not only the time, that time has been with us before. Stephen Lawrence, the Macpherson inquiry was a watershed moment. The Brixton riots and the Scarman report was a watershed moment. It's interesting that an event that happened thousands of miles away, I hope that's a watershed moment for the United States in the same way that the Macpherson inquiry was for us. But we should certainly sit up and take notice.
But look again at stop and search. I mean, that's gone up massively in the last year.
Well, in reality, the government and elected politicians and society will want to look at that issue, and it should. It is still the most iconic issue, and the separation in confidence between the black community and policing.
So why do you think it is that more than 20 years since Macpherson, you're twice as likely to be fined for breaking lockdown in London if you're black, and more than 4 times as likely to get stopped and searched?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Commissioner has addressed a lot of these issues. So the issue of disproportionality is true in the entire criminal justice system, and it's true here. But I'd go back to where we were in 1992, and then in the 80s and the 70s, and compare it to today. There is a dramatic difference between the way we police today and the way we policed then.
So society is still racist, the police force is still racist, but not as racist as it was?
Well, racism still exists in society. I mean, I think anyone who sat in your studio and talked to you about the fact that we have seen the end of racism is living in a different world. I mean,
and within the police too. I
Yeah.
mean, is the Metropolitan Police still institutionally racist?
No, and I think that is a hugely difficult issue to answer if institutional racism means that your policies and processes within your institution are racist, it's not institutionally racist. If institutionally racist means there aren't equal outcomes for everyone regardless of their faith or colour, then we haven't reached that point yet. And I think it is a nuance, or it is a fine description that people can't understand. The point is the battle against racism in society isn't won and won't be won in my lifetime. But the point is, what happened over the last 2 weeks is people started to talk about why people felt the way they felt. And on the back of, bear in mind we're having this conversation in the middle of the world's greatest crisis in living memory, which actually made people sit up and understand about inequality in society, and we saw communities coming together. If you think of that as the backdrop, that is a much more positive place to be than we would have been when I was growing up as a child. My experience was better than my father's. My children's experience is better than mine was. That's the right direction, I think.
This is Center Street North, the dividing line, the racial dividing line of Birmingham, Alabama. We were passing the home of Arthur Shores, whose home was bombed 3 different times during the 60s.
Jeff Drew cannot forget what life was like living in the segregated South of the 1960s.
And I was laying on the floor watching the TV, and the next moment, me and the TV are at the ceiling. It had literally blown us both off the floor. And I had my first taste of what a dynamite blast felt like.
Drew's family wasn't welcome in an all-white neighborhood. Determined to stay, his father took action to protect his family from hate groups.
That wall was built to stop the bullets and the dynamite that the Klan would shoot and throw.
Frankie Adams Johnson grew up in Mississippi, surrounded by symbols of racial segregation.
Whites were privileged, blacks were unprivileged, and we lived with signs of symbols of segregation. Whites here, blacks here.
You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
50 years ago, Birmingham was known as the most segregated city in the South. An example was here at the Lyric Theater. White customers could go through this entrance, while black customers had to go around the corner to a back alley entrance that was marked colored only.
Many Southern communities passed laws to separate blacks and whites in schools, restaurants, and many other public places. Congressman John Lewis, who grew up in rural Alabama, says he tasted the bitter fruits of racism.
I didn't like it. I saw those signs that said white men, colored men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting.
Mississippi is a state that has consistently resisted any move to rid itself of racism.
Hollis Watkins from Mississippi remembers some of the unwritten rules.
If you were walking down the sidewalk and you meet white people, you step off the side and bow your head until they pass. Because if you didn't, it could be considered disrespectful, and they might kick you, beat you, or put you in jail.
I'm not for integration, I'm for segregation, and I will be until I die.
Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
In June 1963, Alabama Governor George Wallace blocked 2 African Americans from enrolling at the all-white University of Alabama. After federal marshals and the National Guard stepped in, Wallace stepped aside. For his daughter Peggy, it was a painful memory.
It stained Alabama, of course, but it stained him for the rest of his life.
We have a right to expect that the Negro community will be responsible, will uphold the law, but they have a right to expect that the law will be fair, that the Constitution will be colorblind.
The symbols of racial segregation in the South started disappearing after the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act.
President Johnson affixes his signature,
giving millions of African Americans the same freedoms and liberties enjoyed by the country's then predominantly white population. Chris Simpkins, VOA News, Birmingham, Alabama.
Portland, Oregon is known as a hub of liberal and progressive thought. It's also one of the most gentrified cities in the country. Now, an ambitious new program, which some experts are calling the first of its kind, aims to atone for the repeated displacement of thousands of African-American families from North and Northeast Portland. In a city with soaring home prices and a steady pattern of gentrification, can it make a difference? Amna Nawaz and producer Mike Fritz recently traveled to Portland to see firsthand how it's all playing out.
For Giovanni Battles and Ashley Rollins, this part of Portland has always felt like home.
You were just surrounded by family growing
that's
up
it,
then.
man. Everybody knew somebody. You would drive by my grandma's any day, it would be 5-10 people, cousins, everybody out there. You just stop and turn into an impromptu barbecue.
Ashley was raised by her mother and grandparents, trailblazers in their time.
She was the first African-American woman judge in Portland. And then my grandfather, he was actually a Tuskegee Airman.
Ashley and Giovanni's roots here may run deep, But when the former high school sweethearts looked for a place to raise their sons, the neighborhood they once called home was out of reach.
We went to high school in this neighborhood. This is what feels like home and comfortable for us. So our hope was to live here, but you know, things have just changed drastically.
That change traces back to the displacement of thousands of African American families from North and Northeast Portland since the 1960s, forced out by waves of city development and gentrification. Portland's policies that led to that exodus are deeply rooted in the state's past, according to Walida Imarisha, who studies Oregon's racial history.
The Oregon Territory passed laws like the Black Exclusion Law in 1844 that outlawed Black people from living in Oregon. It also included the lash law that said Black people would be publicly whipped every 6 months, up to 39 lashes, until they left the state.
The few who stayed in Portland were mostly relegated to the North and Northeast, by 1960 home to more than 80% of the city's Black population. For years, the area saw little to no investment, ignored by lenders and developers. Property values plummeted. But by the 1970s, a series of city projects, including a basketball arena, a new highway, and a proposed hospital expansion, took over huge sections of land, raising hundreds of houses in the way. Private money poured in. So did new homeowners who could afford to live here. Many existing residents were priced out. Fast forward, and the neighborhood that was 68% Black in 1990 was just 28% Black by 2010.
When folks say, well, why aren't there more Black people in Oregon? Why aren't there more communities of color in Oregon? It's important to recognize that's the foundation of it.
Today, just 6% of all Portland residents are Black, and the average home price in North and Northeast Portland is more than $500,000.
Do you want to read Shades of Black?
But to Ashley and Giovanni's surprise, the same city that played a role in driving out so many of their friends and family now stepped in to help them buy their first home through a preference policy that's been dubbed by many as a right to return.
I think acknowledging a wrong is done is the first step, and I want to thank them for the opportunity that we took advantage of.
Started in 2015, the program set aside $20 million for current and former residents of North and Northeast Portland, offering down payment assistance to 65 new homeowners, more affordable rental units, and home improvement loans to help residents stay in the area. Families who could prove their grandparents or parents were displaced from these neighborhoods got priority, but not everyone wants to return.
I've never walked from 15 to 17 since we left out of this neighborhood. This is my first time ever walking this far.
These 2 blocks?
These 2 blocks. I mean, I don't feel welcome here.
Jermaine Flentroy grew up on this Northeast Portland block. He left in 2001 as his family's rent spiked and the neighborhood began changing.
Back then, white people wouldn't come in this neighborhood, right? They would not come in this neighborhood at all. And all of a sudden, you just start seeing like the hipsters, right? And that's what we didn't really get a thing. Then all of a sudden, we started seeing community gardens. And it was like, what are these people doing? Why are they so weird?
Today, he qualifies for the city's Right to Return program, but the area, he says, is no longer home.
There's nothing here for me. When they have this program, Right to Return, I still don't understand what it is, what we're returning to.
I talk to people every single day that want to move back into Northeast Portland.
Leslie Goodlow is the Portland Housing Bureau's Equity and Business Operations Manager.
They want to live in the same neighborhood that their grandmother lived in. They want to live in the same neighborhood that their church is still in. They want to live in the same neighborhood where their barbershop or their beauty salon still is.
But 3 years into a 5-year plan, Portland's Right to Return program is not hitting its marks. 1,000 people applied to buy homes. The city's goal was to fill 65 slots. To date, they've only moved in 6 new homeowners. Those numbers led Portland's mayor to call the program an abject failure.
Getting a mortgage is not easy, and if you're only making, $40,000 a year, you can't afford, a $200,000 or $300,000 mortgage.
How did you not know that the same people that had been disenfranchised for so long and moved to the bottom of the priority list for so long wouldn't immediately be available and ready to make that kind of leap?
So some people could get ready in 6 months, and some people it might take 3 years. And do we hold a slot for somebody that's 3 years out, or do we move somebody else up? And so that's been the struggle.
Meanwhile, home prices in Portland continue to rise.
Property values over the course of the last 10 to 15 years are up somewhere in the range of 400%, 500%, 600%.
which is why Maxine Fitzpatrick says these rental units could offer the city some success. Her nonprofit is working with Portland to build more low-income rentals as part of the Right to Return program.
Our whole thinking around rental property is that it allows them an opportunity to stabilize so they don't have to worry about being uprooted, at the given will of the landlord.
But experts say the key to building wealth is owning a home, and that's where the program is failing.
The program very much needs to be retooled and rebooted to face the realities of the market.
Portland State University's Lisa Bates examined the Right to Return program earlier this year, and she gives the city credit for putting it in place. But whether or not it makes a difference, she says, is something the rest of the country will be watching. Similar efforts to bring back families with ties to gentrified neighborhoods are now underway in New York, Philadelphia, Austin, and San Francisco.
When it comes to a history of racial segregation, of exclusion, of sort of containment of the African American community into a very small neighborhood, followed by the dispersal of those same exact Black families with gentrification, it's extremely typical. This is a very basic story of urban history and urban planning in pretty much every city in the country.
That's a history Cornelius Swart has spent years documenting.
Portland was ranked as the most gentrified city in America.
His new film, Priced Out, tracks the dramatic change in Northeast Portland. He first moved here in the 1990s.
We've spoken to folks who said that when the neighborhood first started to gentrify, that first wave of which I was a part of, folks were conscious that it was a Black neighborhood. Now, the last 5 or 6 years, there's been this erasure of history. People move in here and they don't even know it used to be a Black neighborhood.
This was my grandmother's house, right?
Just across the street
Just
there?
across the street. This is where my main family grew up.
For Jermaine Flentroy, walking these streets today is a reminder of everything he had to leave behind.
We feel like this is stolen from us. Like, we feel angry about it. At least me personally, I feel angry about this.
There's no way to make it right. We're talking about the community that was basically bulldozed. And we're going to be able to probably bring back maybe 2,000 families, if we're lucky.
Some people will say Portland had an image problem it was trying to fix. Is that
well,
fair?
That's probably some of it, but it is a way for the city to demonstrate we recognize what we did, we want to try to do something.
Get them!
The neighborhood isn't what they remember, but Giovanni and Ashley say they're now focused on making new memories.
The best feeling is knowing that we set a foundation for our kids. Owning a home is the first step into stepping up in economic class. And so that's honestly the best feeling I have, is knowing that my kids have something.
A first step towards a future still firmly rooted in their past. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Amna Nawaz in Portland.
That story and more from our series, Chasing the Dream. The series are on our website, pbs.org/newshour.
Whoa.